Well, thank you so much. Anthony Sequeira here with CBT Nuggets, and in this webinar, we are going to take a look at what's new with the AWS Solutions Architect associate level and the year 2018. We are at a really interesting time. Let me show you what I mean. If you head up to awsamazon.com and you go to, that's aws.amazon.com, and you go up to the certification area and you go into AWS Certified Solutions Architect, notice there's this whole which exam should I take concept. There is the AWS Certified Solutions Architect -Associate exam with nothing else after that. And this is the, let's call it the old exam, which is going to expire on August 12th, 2018. There is a new and improved version of this exam, and it's named AWS Certified Solutions Architect-Associate, and then in parentheses, released February 2018. This is the subject matter of this webinar. This is what we are so excited about. And let's answer the question real quickly here. Which exam should you take? I would say to you, if you're like, 90% along the way mapped to this exam objective set, well, then go ahead and take that exam by all means. But if you're on the fence because you just started your prep, for example, or haven't even started yet, please take the new exam. I do think, having taken both of these exams, that this newer one is a bit easier. So target the easier exam, target the exam that is testing on more current concepts and technologies involving AWS. And as we'll see in this webinar, take the exam that covers the really cool material. And I just realized something pretty funny. If you are watching this in the recorded form on YouTube, for example, understand that you may be watching this post-August 2018, and there will not be two exams listed there, one with information in parentheses. You're just going to have the AWS Solutions Architect Associate exam, and you will not have the potential dilemma of which exam you should take. Let's talk about this exam a bit. I find that a lot of students are like, hey, I know all about what Cisco written exams are like. I know all about what CompTIA written exams are like. And there's a lot of kind of mystery surrounding AWS certification exams. This is because AWS is a little more new in the game, and there's not the familiarity. Whew, that word is so tough for me to say. There isn't that familiar sense for these certification exams. No worries, we're going to go through it here together. I also want to point out that this is not the starting point for your AWS certification. I also want to point out that this is not the starting point if you are brand new to cloud. I mean, if cloud is something that you kind of know what it is, you know that it's been hyped lately, but you don't know anything specific about it, definitely don't start with this exam. What I would encourage that you do is you might even want to consider starting with our CompTIA titles. I would look at first CompTIA Cloud Essentials, and then I would take a look at our CompTIA Cloud Plus. What's great about this is this would be vendor neutral. Both of these courses are vendor neutral. So you would be taking a look at technologies not just from AWS, but from across all the big cloud technology vendors. And then you could go ahead and start your AWS specific path. And there is the AWS Cloud Practitioner certification, one exam, one cert, Cloud Practitioner. We have training for it here as well. And that's really supposed to be where you start with AWS certification. Please note there is no requirement that you have to start there. You could jump right to this exam, but I am suggesting these other courses and certifications to build a nice strong foundation to work towards this exam, depending on your newness to cloud technologies. So let's get specific about the Solutions Architect Associate exam, the one for 2018, the one released in February of 2018. You can expect about 65 questions. The questions are multiple choice. There is no AWS concept here of like a simulation. You're not going to be asked to actually configure anything in the cloud in this exam. You're just going to be dealing with a multiple choice format. With these 65 questions, you're going to be given about 130, not about, you're going to be given exactly 130 minutes. Now, a question that I get asked frequently, of course, is what about time pressure? Is time pressure a big deal for this certification exam? And the answer to that is generally no. Most students that I've spoke to and me myself found that that is plenty of time. Now, of course, the students I talked to and myself were well prepared for this exam. So time pressure is always an interesting one because if you really know your stuff, of course it's going to seem like you have absolutely plenty of time to work through these questions. Now, another thing that you're probably thinking at this point is, well, kind of let me decide for myself, Anthony, if you would show me a sample question of one of these 65, I can kind of determine how long it's going to take me, and we will show you a practice question in a moment. As far as a passing score goes, it could always change, but right now you can safely expect having to score a 720 out of a total possible points of 1,000 on this exam. They don't give you any kind of indication as to does one question count more than another and things of that nature. I think it is very, very safe to assume that all questions count the same and that there may be some experimental questions in there that don't count at all. So for the ones they're counting, they would all be of equal value, and then we'll never know if there are exam questions snuck in that are just to test the exam question itself. That is something that Amazon Web Services, of course, reserves the right to do, and we'll never know. So what might an exam question look like? Well, it could certainly look something like this. You have compute processing tasks you need to complete with a window of several months to get them done. You'd like to save money over the standard pricing model of EC2. What should you use? On-demand, spot instance, reserved, or dynamic? Notice, this is asking us to choose the correct architectural, if I could spell that, architectural component of Amazon Web Services. It's asking us if we know how to save money. So these are, as we'll see in a moment when we look at the overall blueprint objectives for this exam, this is stuff directly off the blueprint. This is the type of question we should be expecting. And when it comes to test-taking strategy, there's nothing new here. When it comes to multiple choice, I would get rid of dynamic right off the bat since there is no dynamic EC2 pricing model. There's the default on-demand, then there's spot instance, and then there's reserved. And just so you know, the correct answer here would be to do spot instance pricing. This is where we'll literally be bidding a particular price, and we're hoping that we win this little auction for cheaper EC2 compute power in the Amazon Web Service ecosystem. It's a really cool thing that we can do to get compute power more cheaply than the default on-demand. Let me also point out that reserved is wrong because with reserved, you're going to be in a longer than several month window where you contractually obligate yourself to X amount of compute resources for like 1 or 2 years inside the Amazon cloud. You get a huge discount for prepaying, if you do it that way, and reserving this space of compute power. And that's not clearly what we're discussing here. So a real classic example of a multiple choice that you can expect from this test. When I said this exam seems to be a bit easier than the previous version, one of the reasons is they did trim the size and information of the scenarios, which is really nice. Instead of having like 4 paragraphs we have to read of scenario data, then choosing the right architectural component, for example, we just get more, 2 sentences like is done here, or 3 sentences regarding what we need to do, and then our potential options. So it's a bit easier that way for sure. Now let's take, as promised, a look at the objectives themselves. On this first domain subset, I go into some detail here, and then I won't go into that level of detail because the blueprint is quite large, and we don't want to bog down on this. So there is going to be this breakdown when you look at the objectives into domains. And the first overall domain is designing resilient architectures. What does resilient here mean? Amazon would refer to this more as durability if you look inside like service level agreements and things. It means just, we're not going to lose data. We're not going to have services crap out on us. Crap out being the official terminology. So if we look at the first subdomain, it's designing resilient or durable storage. And notice it's S3, EBS, Elastic Block Store, the Elastic File System, and Glacier services. So I won't go into this specific level of detail with all of our subdomain areas as I promised, but I did it here just so you would feel comfortable that they do spell out for you what subset information you need to know. So that's great, right? They don't just say design resilient storage and then leave it up to you which storage technologies they're going to test. They do make it pretty clear. That's great because there are like probably 12 services that relate to storage, and you wouldn't know at this level of certification which of those you need to study. So now let's round out the other three subsections of this major domain, the first major domain on resiliency. We are going to look at designing decoupling mechanisms. This is where we want to go ahead and make sure that we try and, as much as possible, separate, for instance, services and do messaging between these services so that we have less reliance of one component on another. Or even if there's heavy reliance between the components, with the decoupling, we can have the advantage of better scalability, more flexibility, working with the code that makes up these components in an easier manner. There's just tons of reasons that decoupling is a great idea that go beyond just resiliency. So in this part of the course, I need to talk obviously about decoupling in detail. Now, the multi-tier infrastructure is discussed next as something we should know, and this is at its most basic level, just deciding, okay, are we going to architect everything for this enterprise as a single tier? Or will we truly do a multi-tier? And if we do a multi-tier, how does that help with resiliency? And this really does tie into the decoupling mechanism concept as well. And then finally, kind of a classic topic whenever you discuss resiliency is HA, high availability. So here, an analysis of, okay, we're going to store something in S3, and Amazon Web Services says if we store an object in S3, the simple storage service, that's going to be resilient. We don't have to do anything. Well, why would that be the case? And is there a case in S3 where we wouldn't get automatic resiliency / high availability? And yes, there is. If we used a one zone standard S3, let me give you the proper terminology there. If we used a one zone infrequent access S3 storage class, because we're in one zone, wouldn't get the level of high availability. So this is a rich discussion across many of the services that would need to be had about resiliency, specifically the high availability component. And then you'll note we have our second domain, which is designing performant architectures, and clearly all about performance. So we examine in great detail performant storage. How can we make storage more readily accessible? How can we improve things like input-output operations per second if we're dealing with block storage? All those fun topics. And then we move our attention to performant databases, which are going to be critical in most architectures, performance improvements thanks to caching, and then we wrap up this area with a discussion of designing for elasticity. Remember what elasticity means? The ability to scale in both directions. So we may need to grow an infrastructure dynamically or shrink an infrastructure dynamically. And that is something that is so wonderful about cloud technologies. And we need to be aware of that, and we need to design with elasticity in mind. And then we turn our attention to the third domain, which is, probably no surprise to you, secure applications and architectures. So securing different application tiers, securing the data itself. What are we talking about here? Well, one of the huge topics would be encryption of data, both that's at rest as well as data that is in transit, and then networking infrastructures for a single VPC application. Note they state single VPC application because when we get into like multi-VPC designs with our apps and things of that nature, that would be for more advanced certification levels beyond associate. And then we wrap it up with domains 4 and 5. Domain 4 is cost-optimized architectures. Specifically, it's storage and compute services that are looked at from a cost perspective. And you quickly recognize that our sample question from today's webinar was directly out of Domain 4 and this sub-bullet right here, which is the cost-optimized compute. Domain 5 is define operationally excellent architectures. That sounds impressive, and it is. It's just a whole list across many different services of design things that we would want to consider when it comes to stuff that just works killer. As we would say in Boston, it works wicked awesome. So that's a really big enhancement to this blueprint overall, I would say, is that there is this from top to bottom, really just like this, okay, let's kick butt when it comes to the Amazon Web Service designs and the use of services that we're going to promote.